Welcome to United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America on WSGW. Now, here is your host, Kareem Bowen.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America. I am in the studio with both my main man, the Rob.
It's been a while.
Yeah. Wow.
I need to check on him.
You're getting old, man.
You're saying his name.
That is so crazy.
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
I don't know.
Well, you can't use it. But anyways.
You want to start over?
Yeah.
We'll start over. That was for our online audience. You get the blooper reel.
Welcome to United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America on WSGW. Now, here is your host, Kareem Bowen.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another day of United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America. Today, my words and my tongue are running in opposite directions, but I'm in the studio today with my producer, John B. of the Place B. What's good, John?
Hello.
You should see John's face on the other side. Those of you who are out there, we gave you a social media blooper that you'll be able to go back and have fun with for the rest of your days, right?
Had a false start there. We're good to go.
A false start. We are now in full stride. I want to bring in, as you see him, those of you who are watching via social media platforms, Mark Bassett, my co-host. Mark, what's good?
Not too much, man. Hey now. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you as well, Mark. Mark, what's happening on your end of the world? I have to get used to the visual that I'm looking at right now because I was rubbing my computer screen when I saw you come into the social media stream, trying to clean off the screen.
Well, it's Ash Wednesday, as probably a lot of your listeners know, and I'm pretty open. I'm a practicing Catholic, and today on Ash Wednesday is a holy day of obligation, and at least I believe it is. And Catholics put ashes on their foreheads as a reminder of the season to prepare.
Wow. And so ashes and punchkis and all of that good stuff is a part of this season.
Mardi
right?
Gras, yeah.
I'm Mardi Gras. Okay, yeah. So I'm excited about. I'm excited. I'm just excited about this season. Today the sun was shining a little bit, and it changes everything. You don't know how much you really need the sun until you really suffer through a Midwest winter, and you deal with the clouds and the gloom. The past couple of days have been just a challenge, but you get up today and the sun is shining. And as I look at Mark looking out the window, like, for those of you who are listening, we're here in Michigan, and we're glad to have, 38 degrees and some sunshine. And when I talk about the cloudiness and just seeing the sun, I see him look over his left shoulder, and I'm assuming he's looking out the window.
I am looking out at the window at the sun. It's a chilly for Southern California, like 61, 62 degrees. I was out on the beach yesterday, went in the ocean. It was really nice. And you're right. It's really nice to have sun almost every day.
Okay. but today, it's interesting because I've actually gotten in. I'm starting to lock in to what's happening in the wonderful world of politics. And something happened a number of days ago that caught my attention, and I was like, "Uh-oh, we're back in the silly season of things." There was a midterm election or something going on, and there was a Black African American woman running as a Republican, and a white Caucasian that was running as a Democrat. And someone made the comment that they didn't think that she would win because those white Republicans they're not going to vote for that Black woman over that white man. And it just brought me back to this show and some of the conversations that we've had, and how it seems that sometimes we look as though we have come so far, and then we say stupid stuff. We get into these what I call the silly season, which is politics, the political landscape, and we lose our marbles or our whereabouts, our thoughts, our common decency, and all that stuff goes out the window. So
It's because we join a team.
is that what it is?
Politics and religion, two things you don't want to talk about.
We talk about those every week here.
Yeah, no, and so it made me think about that, and so I just started just looking at different things in the course of me looking for where people were and what people are saying politically surrounding that particular situation. It kind of led me, and I ended up on some site for Dane County, Wisconsin. So shout out to Dane County, Wisconsin, which is where their second largest city, their capital city, is actually located. So I was sitting there like, okay, this is interesting, but it took me and it reminded me of how we were having conversations on race and how we were talking about having courageous conversations, but to think that a county actually went through a process and said, hey, these are the rules that we're going to utilize and challenge people to have courageous conversations. And they came up with this list. And we're going to talk about this a little bit today, because as we go through this silly season, as we said, our relationships are challenged. We have relationships with folks and friends and family, and it's just really kind of interesting. And so I think since this is a place where we have these conversations on race in America, let's talk about setting ground rules for conversations on race. And it's interesting because as I was looking through this, Mark, and I just want to share what it said, because I think this is so powerful. It says one of the challenges of talking about race is using language that's respectful, accurate, and understood by all. That is a powerful starting point if you think about it, because how many times have we had conversations and we say a word that is passé or outdated, or a word that is not necessarily PC, or the accepted word by the community that we're having that conversation with, and things go awry.
It doesn't even necessarily have to be about using that word. Oh, we don't use that word anymore. But using loaded language, like there are phrases and statements.
Give us an example of what you mean.
Okay. Give me a minute.
Yeah, no, I think that when we say this, let's have some examples of things that we can utilize, because I think it helps people to understand where we're coming from. But Mark, go ahead. You look like you got.
Well, I was going to say it's any relationship is a two-way street, so you have to be careful and thoughtful about what you say. But at the same time, as a listener, I always encourage people to assume goodwill and don't be overly sensitive, and don't assume that someone is trying to be mean or nasty. And so it's a two-way street, like any relationship.
Words such, back to what I was saying, words such as saying something's insensitive has a certain connotation. At the same time, saying someone is oversensitive, oh, you're just being a baby, kind of has that kind of connotation to it.
No, we got to be aware.
You need to be aware of what you're saying, and you need to be ready to hear things that are precise and accurate, like that accuracy word. Like if I mean to say something, you got to rely on me that's what I mean to say, and please don't take it out of context.
Don't make my words say something different than what I'm meaning. And I think that's important. And that's what, and then the understood by all. It's funny because I was having a conversation, and this is real life. You cannot make this up. I was talking to this older white gentleman, and he just sparked up a conversation. I think we were at like Firestone or something like that, getting tires rotated or something.
Well, I thought you were at the U.S. Open at the golf Firestone. No, at the Firestone, the tire place. Okay.
Anyways, we're having this conversation. He starts this conversation with me because normally when I go in, I'm like the guy with the headphones on. I got my laptop and I'm working. He starts talking to me. I take my headphones off, and he's just, hey, good morning. How you doing today? He's like, nice old guy, right? And then he starts talking. He goes, it's really bad about this. And he uses the term, I just hate when, people just don't understand that colored people are people too. And I was just, and I said to myself, like, oh my goodness, here we go. That was my thought, like, oh my goodness, here we go. But then I had to catch myself. He started the conversation off, in good spirits. His intentions were good. He just did not understand, and he was using terminology that was inaccurate, and it was not something that was understood to be acceptable by the person that he was speaking with. So I had to pull myself back and give him some grace. And I thought to myself, should I correct him or not? My initial thought was like, I don't care. Let him tell somebody else that, and they'll correct him for sure. But then I thought about it. I said, this is such a teachable moment. And how many times do we have these moments and we just be like, whatever, and we walk away? And so I said, so you know what? I know you didn't mean anything by it. And I just kind of chuckled in my conversation. And I said, but the word colored, we don't use that word anymore. Many people might be offended. And he was very apologetic, which I think is the response that you should give when people say that you use terminology or words that are offensive. And I think this gets to what you were saying, Jonathan. He says, I didn't mean anything by it. I said, I know you didn't. That's why I wanted to correct you, so that when you have a conversation with the next person, that you're aware of that fact. Now, what he does with that after this is no longer my concern, but
that's a great example, Kareem, of assuming goodwill. You assume
absolutely.
Goodwill,
that's what I was saying.
Yeah. And so, I mean, and again, like in his, I don't know how old this gentleman was, but if he was 80 or 90.
You're about right.
I mean, back in his day, that was an accepted term, probably.
I have the same. Do you have triggers that you have when people have conversations with you, that kind of, when you hear those words, they kind of get you?
Yeah, you've heard mine. White privilege, or privilege is kind of my trigger. I have an immediate guttural negative reaction to that. So.
Yeah, Mark, yours is white privilege, because I know that whenever we're having a conversation and I say white privilege, Mark is like, ugh. And your nonverbal, you don't say anything all the time with these words, but your nonverbals kind of kick in. Yeah. But I think that we have to be aware of those, because I'll tell you another one of mine is that when an older white man calls me boy, when he calls me boy, and I know that he didn't mean anything by it, but I'm just kind of like, dude, you need to catch up with the terminology. So I often find myself correcting in those moments, in a kind way, when I think that it's not meant to be offensive. Otherwise, I'll correct you, and I'll not be so kind about how I correct. Do you have words, Jonathan, that kind of, when you hear those words, you're like, oh, your eyes roll, and you're like, oh boy, here we go?
I can't think of any words off the top of my head, but there's an argument style where whenever somebody assigns motive, like if you don't know why I said that thing or why I did that thing unless I tell you why I did that thing. So if you assign motive, if you say, well, you just did that because X, Y, or Z, now
you're going to tell me what I meant by what I said.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think that this is important to all my white folks out there who are listening, up in the balcony. We're waving at you right now. I just want to, there's some things that I want to make sure that as we're having this conversation, that we're aware of. And one of those things is, and I think that we get it, when you're talking to a group of especially Black folk, and you say you people and you otherize them, those are things that we no longer do. So let's make sure that we are being aware of those things, because sometimes you can hear the oxygen leave the room. We say, well, you people are, and these are just things that we have to have conversations about. But there are also things that, and I'm gonna say this, and a lot of people may not agree with what I'm getting ready to say. When I say that, I'm talking about my Black and brown folks. There are certain things that we've got to not be so sensitive about, in terms of how we communicate and when we're having conversations that surround race, because everyone is not, on Google looking up the most current PC word to utilize. And so we've got to sometimes take some of these things off of our shoulders, and be, understand that this is going to be an uncomfortable process. What are you thinking, John?
Do you think, and I don't want to...
Don't offend me, John.
I don't want to offend you here. But do you think minorities are often on their guard? Do you think they put their guards up and start looking for those things that reading into what people are saying when they have these conversations?
Well, first of all, let me say this: since we are not a monolith, I can't speak for all minorities. There are certain things that are acceptable that I will share, right? That
Yep.
we understand. As it relates to start looking for those words, no, I don't. I think that
But you
Go ahead.
put your guard up and like, okay, I'm having one of these conversations. I need to be careful what
I
they're
think that
saying.
we all do to some degree.
Okay.
I mean, wouldn't
Yeah.
you agree, Mark? Don't you think that when we start having, conversations that really matter about race, and we start engaging, and especially, I love having when we get to heated conversations because that means that we're starting to unearth some of the things that we have held to that are dear. And I think that once we begin to get uncomfortable in those spaces, we can then cool down and think about like why. And you've done this before, Mark. You've left our conversation, but like, I went home and I was thinking to myself, like, why was I so unnerved or bothered by, that statement, or why did that cause me? And I think that is when we really begin to see the daylight and are able to build on that uncomfortability, because until we get comfortable being uncomfortable, we're really not going to see much change. If we continually talk and we have surface conversations and we keep it nice and polite, what's going to change?
Yeah, nothing. Well, that's why my whole big thing has always been around get to know people, push yourself because it's really easy to assume negative things of people you don't know. But what you find out is once you meet people, the reality is whatever race, religion, they're just people and they largely want the same things as you do.
I want to ask this. Were you done, Mark? I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
I want to ask this question because I know that this is something that often comes up in my conversations with my Black and brown communities, and I'll say specifically when I'm talking to Black folks, and I want you all to respond to this. And this is a real critique, and so I think that this is a good space to ask this question. There is a feeling that in order for in order for a Black person to have a conversation that really challenges white people, that they have to have a great relationship in order for folks to be reflective, white folks to be reflective.
I think that's just people. I think it's very person dependent. I don't think it's race dependent. I think, if I didn't know Jonathan and he's a, emotionally immature person, and I start to have a tough conversation with him, which he's not. Jonathan's extremely emotionally mature.
Completely the opposite, right?
Yeah. But if I did, I don't think he would react any differently than, if I were white, Black, or Asian, and so I think it's a human nature issue, and it depends on that person's emotional intelligence and willingness to engage in tough conversations.
Your question turned the question that I asked on its head a little bit.
Okay.
When I asked, do people coming from the minority side of things put up their guard when they're having these conversations?
Yeah.
Absolutely. White people put up their guard because any sort of, I think you used the word challenge.
Yeah.
Any sort of challenge can be perceived as a threat. And in today's world where you say one thing wrong in the wrong space and suddenly your career is over, people are coming after your public image, there's all sorts of repercussions for it. I think that in order for people to let that guard down and think this isn't a direct challenge, this isn't someone trying to get me, sometimes it feels like there needs to be that relationship there. I don't know if it's true or not, but I can see the interpretation.
If someone's out there filming, you'll see these clips where someone's clearly trying to provoke somebody. They've got somebody else filming. I mean, that's a trap. But when you and I, you've told this story many times. I have as well. When you and I met at lunch, you challenged me, and I didn't react negatively. I didn't react. I took it.
That's why I like you, Mark, because you didn't.
Yeah.
You didn't freak out.
That's why, to me, it's an anecdotal piece of evidence of, like, I think it just becomes very person dependent and who the person is and where they are in their kind of emotional intelligence and state. Not that I'm highly emotionally intelligent, I'm not, but
Go ahead, John.
I was used to those kind of situations where I get asked tough questions.
That was a good point, Mark.
And it doesn't require someone to be recording. And today, if you and Kareem sat down, Mark, sat down for lunch, and Kareem walked out and accused you of saying some terribly racist stuff, do you think your position at the time would have come under some scrutiny?
Well, he would certainly, would damage my credibility in the communities that listen to him.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, and again, like anytime you're forming a relationship, you are on guard of what you say to make sure you don't say. I think if you're white, speaking to a black person for the very first time, you are on guard to make sure you don't say something flippantly that can be misconstrued. Whereas with a white person, you're probably not.
Let me tell you something that I've learned from us having these conversations, and this is a real admission. And I didn't think we were going to go this way, but since we're here, I'm going to give this one. What I've realized is that me as a person, not that I am waiting for an opportunity to pounce, as we were talking about Jonathan, but there are certain things that I am like tired of people being a little insensitive about. Okay. And
I
so
think I've stepped on a couple of them before in past conversations. I think we've been there.
Yeah, we have. And I mean, but we're here today. And I think that what it does is I recognize, because we set a framework for this conversation, that at the end of the day, like Jonathan didn't mean anything to buy it. Sometimes I'll be like, he's just young and immature. No, that's what I say in my head. But what I realize is that, like, in certain situations, there are certain things that I can be very strong in my presentation about, because I'm like, listen, I'm over this. Okay. I am over this. And so then my response in my presentation, or when I say something, especially in a racial conversation with white folks, I'm very open, and I love having these conversations because I think that they're necessary. But there are certain things I'm just like, okay, now I'm going to come in and I'm having conversations which I think are non-offensive, but are very strong. Well, I've learned that my tone can sometimes come off very strong in my presentation, even when I am defending Black folks or situations that are important to me. Sometimes I realize that my tone is strong, and I wanted to say that because one of the critiques that I have, I'll say me, I won't say all Black folks, but that I have and other folks like me have in conversations, is that white folks can be a little fragile when it comes to having conversations about race. And what I mean by that is that, as we had this conversation with Mark, folks ain't trying to have these real conversations. Somebody said that I'm passionate. I am very passionate, I guess, about everything that I say, or intense. And I think that it's kind of a situation like we've got to get to a place, one, where folks like myself who are tired of certain types of injustices taking place, am more aware of how I present my argument against things that occur. And I think that my white counterparts could stand to beef up in terms of being able to receive things of racial nature when they arise. What are your thoughts?
I'm not. I almost want to hear an example of what you're talking about. I think I know.
There have been things where
you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Where we've talked about it, and especially the conversation about gentrification that we had last year.
Great example.
After we recorded the show, Kareem and I were talking about it, and he was talking about this needs to happen and this needs to, and I said, you're not going to get through to anybody making that kind of argument.
There you go.
You need to come at it from this kind of angle. And it's one of those, what are people going to shut down as you are being, not the word offensive has a certain connotation, but you are on the offensive, and that puts me on the defensive, versus we're having a conversation, we're having a debate in some sense.
Yes, and so to the point of what Jonathan was saying, I find that sometimes I have to. I don't want to use a word, but I'm going to use it because I can't think of another word. Codify. I forgot to coddle certain conversations, or be very careful how I present them, because I feel like sometimes when I'm having these conversations with certain white people, they're very sensitive when it comes to race. When they clutch their pearls is how I feel sometimes when we get into those conversations. So when we get back, we're going to put a period in this portion of the conversation, where we're going to get into the ground rules that Dane County set for courageous conversations surrounding race. I think this is so powerful considering the headwinds that are coming. Stick and stay, don't go away. We'll be back with more United Shades of Gray.
You're listening to United Shades of Gray on WSGW.
This is Kareem. We're back with more United Shades of Gray. We are talking about setting the ground rules for courageous conversations, and the work that I'm not sure if it's a prosecutor, if it's a county commissioner, supervisor, whoever it is, did in Dane County, D-A-N-E County, Wisconsin. You can Google it, check it out, pull it up. And so we're going to share this because I somehow stumbled across this and I thought that it was very interesting. On the conclusion side of our conversation, I was asking the question, in short, there was a book that we talked about once before, White Fragility. Are white people fragile when it comes to having conversations that are hard about race?
You want an answer?
Yeah, I'm just wondering.
Well, I think they're.
What do you think about that critique? Is my question.
Yeah, I think probably. I think there's a level of sense of fear. Kind of back to our discussion earlier in the show of like, if I say one wrong thing, there's a whole lot of downside. The balance of downside versus upside is heavily stilted in one direction in that conversation, and so there's this huge trepidation of like, man, if I really engage here and say what I really think, or really bad things could happen and not very much good could happen.
You know, Mark, I understand that. I do understand that. You understand who I am, and we both have a number of friends in mutual places, and you know, so I operate in some very interesting spaces.
Yep.
Some places I've been the only black man. You understand that, and I think the same thing that you're saying also applies to someone like me, who is bold enough to engage in those conversations in places where people, I know they're not going to be comfortable. I know that it's going to be.
That's a fair point.
Yeah, because I become the angry black man.
Yeah, because you become the angry black man, and I mean, you've got a business to run, and you've got a ministry you're trying to do, and if you shut all these kind of high-powered people off, that really, really,
and I think, go ahead. What were you saying, Mark? What was the?
Well, I think it speaks to your courage, but I also think it speaks to the relationship you've developed with those people, because you've taken the time over years. And I think, I know who most of the people who you're talking about.
Yeah.
Where you developed a personal relationship with them that allows you to have that kind of conversation, because they know you and they respect you, and they know at the core you're trying to do the right thing.
And I'm approached, by these friend circles, these friend groups, and they ask me, they'll say, Kareem, because they know I'm going to be honest, so do you really think, or what do you think about this? And we will have some very hard conversations about race and about how these things play out. I'll tell you, one big thing was when the whole conversation, Jonathan's favorite subject, of systemic racism came up, and we were talking about, is this a systemic problem, meaning that it's in the systems of our governments and systems that we operate in, or is it an individualized issue? And so I've had those conversations. And it's interesting because I feel like it is my responsibility to hold true to the things that are important to me. And I think that the importance is that we've got to understand how to present our positions and not be so disagreeable that we blow the whole ship up in the process.
Well, I think you're making a great point in that, and again, I don't know how this will come out. I think you bridge both the different worlds extremely well, and so you know how to engage certain type of people in certain situations one way. You know that there's different forms of communication and different ways to communicate depending on it's all about audience analysis. Who is your audience? What is my point? And how do I most effectively deliver that point to that audience? And you have the skill to do that with different audiences by changing how you deliver that point. Whereas someone that has one style, it's going to be effective in one group, but a disaster potentially in a different group.
So read the room. What are you going to say, John?
Yeah. I also think when you're giving a message that comes off strong, there are two extremes to kind of the response you can get. The one extreme is, well, you're wrong. You're just out to get me, and shut down completely defensively. The other response is fold. Yes, you're right. Of course. Yeah, I'm so sorry. I apologize. Oh no. And both are just as useless as each other.
And I think that's good. One of the things that it appears to me is that when I have conversations with white people, and I understand that when I go there, there is a sentiment, or I get the feeling like they feel like I want them to feel some kind of way because historically my people have felt a particular way, or I feel like I am trying to reverse the tables on a situation. And I'll tell you, I've never had a conversation about race with white folks or with any folks that had anything to do about reversing the tables and giving people. That's not how we're wired. If you really think about how black folks ended up here, you think about how we have kind of lived and continually, for the most part, we're a very forgiving people. And so our desire has never been to pay white people back. It's just been to get white people to understand the inequalities that really do exist, and to see them from a perspective that may be different from the platform that they're used to seeing them as being the majority in a community. And sometimes that's hard to do. And so that's sometimes where you find me getting very passionate when I have conversations with Mark, who understands that there are very serious inequalities. And then I say something about white privilege. I'm like, Mark, how you gonna get mad about white privilege?
It's an emotional trigger. I've told you that before. I understand it. I just don't like the word, just like, whatever.
And that's fair, Mark. And I'm going to say something to you, because I think that this is a serious point of growth for both of us, because when I use that term, you were visibly irritated, and I realized that I didn't care that you were visibly irritated. I've been irritated about stuff my whole life.
No, I've learned to, because I understand it in a sense. Like, I know, what we've talked about before. What I don't like about it is kind of, I read it as like somehow I didn't work hard for what I got, because I did.
Okay,
and I understand. I've been blessed with two parents. Middle class. They were able to pay for my college. I was able to go to a great university. I get all that. I just, I read it as like, you were just given this, and that I find that offensive.
That's the point. Let's capture it. I know this is a different than where we were going, but I think that this is a point. I think that we can really begin to make some understanding and some headway in this conversation, especially when we talk about issues on privilege, the word privilege. I'm going to keep saying white privilege because Mark really gets comfortable. No,
I've learned. I've gotten more comfortable with it. I just let it. There's an initial trigger, and then I let it go.
But this is the thing, though, about that, Mark. Right? I talked to you about the concept of white privilege, and you showed me, then we talked about why you felt uncomfortable with that. Right?
Yeah. Yep.
This is what's crazy, right? Because we get caught up on words that don't help conversations on both sides.
Words are powerful. Stones don't break my bones, but what's that term? They break my bones,
but words, but words will never hurt me. That is so untrue, because words trigger emotions and feelings and things of that nature. And it was funny because we had this conversation. This came long after when we were having this conversation on white privilege, right? I'm talking to you about it. But the fact of the matter is, the entire reason why you sought out a relationship with me, or why we came together, I'll say, not that you sought out, but the reason we came together was because you recognized that there were some inequalities that were taking place that you wanted to do something about. Now, I say this because I have black folks to be like, man, that dude on the United Shades of Grey, I don't like when he laughs when he makes comments. I feel some kind of way. But the fact of the matter is, you approach me with the desire to say, look, these are inequities that I see taking place. Kareem, how can we make a change in this? But then the same dude had an issue, because this is why words and how we view words and connotations, and maybe even experiences with how words are used, are so powerful. When I use the term white privilege, but you understood that inequity exists, and so inequity exists because there's a privilege that also exists. Right. But for you, and this is what I think is important, and I want to make sure we drive this home. When you heard the word privilege, it triggered a different understanding than what I was intended, meaning that you felt like everything you had in life you were given and you never had to work for anything.
Right. Yep.
And I would never say that about you, because I know your track record and I know what you've been able to do. And then you understood the concept of getting a head start. And it's really the same concept, just different words. Yep. So what I learned in that conversation, as we have these conversations about race, is that words really do matter. And so we have to really pay attention to the words that we use. And then when certain words are offensive, let's explain why those words are offensive, or let's explain what those words mean to me. And then we can coalesce as one of the key things that we got to use the same language. So sometimes we're having conversations using words that have a perceived understanding to us that may have a complete different meaning to someone else. And we can be offensive and not even intending to do so. Jonathan, I see your head, your mind working over there. What's going on?
I was looking through some of these, this list that you gave us from
go ahead.
Dane County.
Take the lead, young man.
I'm bringing us back to our subject matter here. Back on track. No, but I think there is something missing when it comes to that, tying it right back into what you were just talking about. You need to be honest and forthright about, why are we having this conversation? Where am I coming from going into this conversation? And I think that happens before you agree to these rules. And there's no consequence for breaking it. It's a faux pas, whatever.
Why is that important? Why do you think that's important? Not to say that I'm just curious as to why you think that's important.
Because if I don't know what you want to get out of this conversation, and you don't know what I want to get out of this conversation, neither of us are going to get anywhere in this conversation. We're not going to make any headway and I'm not saying come into it with an agenda, but come into it with
actually the opposite.
I want to learn more.
Right.
Or I really there's this one point that I really want you to understand.
Yeah.
If you're very clear about, this is what I'd like to happen in this conversation, we might not get there. That's okay. But if it's not, I'm coming in here to point out that you're a racist. I'm coming in here to point out that you're fragile, and your whole shtick that you go out and you give talks and it's all a farce. If you're coming in and you don't know what the other person is doing, it's easy to assume.
How about this as well, Jonathan? How about we get to the point that when we have conversations on race, that we stop assuming the worst first?
Yeah, that's back to my very first thing is assume goodwill. Assume that the person is coming from a good spot. I tend to think people either trust people or they don't trust people. And I start from a position of trust, that they're coming from a place of goodwill. And that's what I'm going to assume until I find out otherwise. And so I don't assume someone's got a nefarious motive.
What are you going to say?
I don't. I assume people are evil. Legitimately. I do. And so
Jonathan, you kind of, I don't trust nobody.
No. So it's much easier to assume goodwill if Kareem, if you come to me and you say, here's the point that I really want you to understand, I want to help you wrap your head around this.
But if he's evil, Jonathan, he's lying to you. But he's got a different point.
But then he's made an assertion, he's made a statement, and I can judge whether he's lying or not.
Okay. And Mark, that's kind of where we went with it, because I was like, I'm not trying to offend. I mean, we just became cool, we were having these conversations. I'm not trying to offend you, but at the same token, I want to understand where you're standing.
Yeah, ultimately, I'm asking for your time, for your help That's
Yeah.
how I looked at it.
Yeah.
And it, all the other meetings, no offense to those other people, were just kind of platitudes. And what I actually enjoy the kind of the tough discussions. And I actually appreciated your challenge because it was like, who are you coming in here? What are your true motives? And I don't want to waste my time on someone that doesn't have true motives. And that's how I took your line of questioning. And it was fair and it was tough, but it was fair.
That was Kareem being forthright about what you wanted to get out of the conversation.
Yeah.
You weren't coming at it from a weird angle. You were saying, this is what I want to get out of this
conversation.
conversation.
He didn't explicitly state that, but that's how I took it.
It was more like this. Why do you want to know about the Black community?
So
Why do you want to be in my community? That's what
I could have easily taken it as kind of like, okay, here's an angry, the angry Black guy kind of a thing. But I chose not to because I felt like they were all fair, legitimate. If I were overly sensitive, like I am to the word white privilege, I would have been offended maybe by it. Because our mutual friend called and apologized.
He was like, wow. He called me back like, why were you so hard on him? I'm like, I wasn't hard on him. I asked him any question. I think that if someone wants to deal in Black America, I think that they should be able to answer those questions.
Fair questions.
And then when I talked to Mark, I was like, dude, I'm good. I wasn't mad about nothing. Like, really? Like, that was lightweight. Let's see what we can do now. And I think it's important. Yeah. So the groundwork rules for this conversation from Dane County on this conversation, it says to read this aloud. So I'm going to read this aloud for our hearers. Courageous conversations are dialogues in which participants commit to engage each other, Jonathan, with honesty, open-mindedness, and vulnerability.
Why are you calling me out?
Well, no, I'm just saying because you said that.
I think that vulnerability is a really key one, personally.
I was going to say the same thing, Mark. We let your fangs, retract. Put away your claws. Let's be vulnerable. To listen deeply, to better understand each other's perspectives, and to sustain the conversation when it gets uncomfortable or diverted. And so I think that I'm really impressed by this framework. So let's continue. The goal of ground rules for continuing courageous conversations is to be able to have a conversation about race without excessive fear of being, here we go, Mark, labeled racist, biased, or bigoted, to avoid blaming or being blamed, and to avoid discounting or invalidating the experiences, feelings of others. So to that end, we'll talk about these, but how powerful was that introduction or that framework for these ground rules?
It was a lot more grounded, I guess, than a lot of articles or takes on how to talk about race tend to be slanted one way or the other. This is very much we want to set up neutral ground.
I'm just reading Teresa's comment. Sorry, I wasn't laughing at you, Jonathan.
I often say, and tell me if this is offensive, but I'm going to say it because we having this conversation. We're being honest. I often say that I think that many white people have a fear of being labeled racist than being racist, or to allow racist activities to actually take place.
I think there are two different emotions tied to those things.
Okay.
I think the being labeled racist is tied to a fear response, whereas seeing racist activities take place is tied more to a place of disgust or anger.
Okay.
And so I think that kind of the fact that it's two different emotions. No, I don't think white people are afraid to see racist activities happen. I think they are disgusted and upset that it happens. But there is fear of being labeled a racist, and sometimes fear is a very strong motivator for actions, whereas disgust or anger can be kind of shoveled aside.
Okay, I think that's good. Let's ask this question. What makes a person a racist? So, someone asked me that question to ask the question. What makes a person a racist?
Wow. Well, what's the dictionary definition, I guess, is kind of where I would almost go.
I would think it is some inherent belief that people of one race are inherently
Oh,
better,
sorry, Jonathan.
worse, or in other ways different?
I wouldn't say different, because I do think different races have different cultures, different. To me, I think it's like
I'm
people
talking.
of one race are superior to another race, or another one race is inferior. I do think there are differences, and that's okay. But
I think you can separate race from culture, and in certain ways, and say, because there's a difference between, because of your background, I think that you're different, better or worse than me.
Well, yeah, but physically there are differences and things like that. So to me, it's more about, in my mind, racism is more about people think one race is better than another, or another race is worse than, below others.
That's kind of more bias and prejudice.
Okay,
Because when I think the term racism, I think action. I think
that's a
power.
fair point. Yep.
Yeah, you understand. So I think
Yep.
action. I think power. I think imbalance of power, as a matter of fact, and the understanding that I feel that I am better than that person, and because of that, I'm going to hire people who look like me.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good point, Kareem, because I do think what I described is kind of a bigotry or prejudice,
Yeah.
which does then tend to lead to actions that I guess by definition would be racist. I don't necessarily believe power implies racism, but yeah, a belief that then causes you to do something against a particular race that's unfair or unjust.
Now let me ask this question, because now it's, go ahead.
Hold on.
Go ahead.
So with that definition, racism only exists when it results in action?
I think racism is the action.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it is the action. I think that it is the use or the reference to how my power is engaged.
So racism is how prejudice affects
and bigotry.
others.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. And so my question then becomes.
So I'm going to read the dictionary definition, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
It's a noun. It's prejudice. So prejudice would be, I guess, a synonym, actually. Discrimination or antagonism by an individual, community, or institution against a person or people of on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group. So prejudice would be a subset of racism, at least according to this definition. So it would be prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism.
I think you need, antagonism.
Yeah.
That's an action.
Yeah.
But prejudice is not an action necessarily.
Yeah.
It's a belief. So it's, I guess it's an action in the sense of it's a mental action. So, but anyway.
Let me ask this question, because I think that is it possible, or how would you label an individual? Say that I am an individual who benefits from a particular action that is, why are people still doing it? All right.
People are peoples, Calvin. That's why. I mean, that's ultimately racism has existed since the beginning of time, and probably will exist for a lot more time. Is kind of what I believe.
Am I racist if I understand that racism is in existence and in operation in a particular situation, and I do nothing to hinder or to change the situation? I think I think
that's a bit of a stretch. I mean, I understand where you're going with that.
No, I was no.
Yeah.
See, you
Yeah.
just did what Jonathan said.
Yeah.
Because as we were talking, I had a conversation where, so I wasn't trying to picture or paint anything.
That you weren't implying that.
No, I wasn't implying that.
That gets into.
Actually, if you read the Bible, you could literally interpret that as then you are implicitly being racist as well, because you should do something about it.
Okay. And I think that I've heard, I can't remember who it was that talked about our need for being racist. Not to be non-racist isn't enough, but we've got to be anti-racist, meaning that we all have a part to play to end this system of oppression, whether it be, go ahead, Jonathan, in whatever form that it shapes itself. So just being non-racist is not enough for us. We all have a role to play in killing this hatred seed that we see in operation called racism.
Yeah.
I want to thank you guys, and one day we're actually going to get to ground rule number 1.
Yeah, you didn't get to the ground rules, man.
We didn't get to the ground rules, and I'm not going to cheapen these ground rules by trying to put them out there in the next 30 seconds. So maybe we'll hold these for another conversation.
You want to put the link in the post?
I think that's a great idea. If I could find the link right offhand.
Okay.
Jonathan, if you look up, Jonathan's like, just keep on talking. I want to thank you guys. We're going to try to put the link in the stream so that you can get this information. Thank you guys for continually tuning in to United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America. God bless you. Grace and peace.